What's going on? Welcome to the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad. I'm your host, Chris Finn, and I'm excited today to jump into the second part of our series on the core 4 transfer training principles. So if you remember, if you missed last episode, last Friday, so it'll be 2 episodes ago, right? Because we put out episodes every twice a week, Wednesdays and Fridays. So skip last Wednesdays and go to last Friday. So 2 episodes back. And you're going to hear the episode on weight shift. That is the first of the core 4 transfer training principles. Remember, we're doing a four-part series here. There's 4 of these that we utilize at P4S Golf that I want to give you insight into to help you get better at the game of golf. And these are incredibly important. Just as a refresher, it may have been a week since you listened, the reason this is important is for those of you who pass all the mobility tests. All right, so we'll have the link in the show notes for that free assessment. If you haven't taken that, please take that before you try any of this, because I don't want you to hurt yourselves. Okay, and you got to make sure that you have the ability to, in particular, rotate into your lead hip, the hip internal rotation on your lead leg. Okay, so transfer training, just quick reminder for all of you who have good mobility, who pass all the tests mobility-wise, who have good strength, particularly on that lead leg in your lower body. To be able to support you getting to your lead side, right? And then now, last week we talked about you have the ability. You do shift your weight to your lead side. At the top of the transition. Basically, if you look at all great players, you can start to see them, that lower body moving towards the target, and a lot of times almost as the upper body is finishing, basically as that club usually is starting to begin the lag, or those wrists are hinging, right? So the hips are moving towards the target as the efficient golfer is finishing their backswing. And that actually leads to the second of the 4 transfer training principles, which is the hips leading the transition, right? So the reason we start with weight shift from last episode, remember last week we talked about the weight shift board, is because if you don't do that, you can't have your hips leading the transition, right? Now, it is possible. It's not super common, but I have seen a few instances where people actually create a weight shift, but they still lead the transition with their upper body, right? Or a lot of times they'll do it together, right, at the same time. That's probably the more common of the two. What we want to see is the weight shift where, if you remember the weight shift board, it's like a seesaw, right? So like a 4x6 board on like a wooden dowel, let's say, right? So you push down to the ground on that lead side as you're finishing the top of your backswing. Then we want to see that those hips starting to unwind, right? So the weight shift obviously is a lateral move, a horizontal move, and then we want to start to see those hips starting to unwind, and that's the toe heel forces that are starting to drive them around. Okay, that is what leads to the third of the 4 transfer training principles, which we will talk about next week. But the hips leading the transition is the second transfer training principle. And the one drill I want to talk about here that is actually really, really good, you can actually do it with a band. If you have somebody with you, it's really, really easy. And that's, you can kind of wrap the band around your hips and you actually pull away from the target with the band. So as you're coming down with the golf swing, you actually have to fight against the band, push the bands away. So you have to activate that hip moving, initiating that downswing. So you have the weight shift. We've actually had people on the weight shift board with the band around their waist. So because we're working on combining the weight shift with the hips leading the transition, right? So it's a neuromuscular facilitation technique where you actually resist the movement that you want to see, right? Because if think of it this way, if somebody is pulling on a band, pulling you away from the target, you have to fight that in order not to fall over. So you actually have to push towards the target. And if the resistance is around your lower body, around your hips, that push has to come with your lower body. Because if you push with your arms, it doesn't do anything. The hips are still going to get pulled backwards. So this is a great drill. Again, this is something you can find on our YouTube page. You can find, just search, hip lead transition drill or banded, band hip drills. There's lots of different names for it. But if you can visualize it, you basically have a long, like an FMT band, a long rubber band, like a long exercise band around your hips. And you're actually, so what we'll do is actually like wrap it around. So a lot of these bands have handles on either end, right? So you can kind of almost like you wrap it around the waist, and then you take the one end and you wrap it through the other handle so you can kind of cinch it. So it's truly wrapped around the waist. But that point of pull is pulling the golfer. If you think of like a down the line camera view, it's pulling from where that camera would be, directly in line with the target, but away from the target. And that forces that golfer to have to push against that band. Now, early on, if somebody's really struggling with it, it's the same thing we do with all movement training. You can actually assist the movement. So you could flip the band around and you could actually assist the movement so the person actually starts to feel what it feels like for those hips to move, lead the transition. But if we're actually trying to get this to concretely stay and feel the person activating the right muscles, right, then we actually want to resist the movement so they actually start to get a feel from a kinesthetic standpoint of how to get there. So again, super quick episodes in this 4-part series, but because I want it to just focus on these specific areas, I want to give you what the training principle is, a simple drill to go do it, and I want to give you a week to go try it. Okay. So remember, quick review. You got to pass the mobility. You got to have the strength. If you don't have those 2 areas, just forget this 4-episode series. Go get those 2 areas. Shouldn't take you more than 6 to 8 weeks if you're doing the right stuff, 15 minutes a day. If you do more, it'll be quicker. But the first step is making sure that we have the actual weight shift. So that's where that weight shift board is a great tool to use. The second is making sure that we have the hips leading the transition. And when we do that, that leads to the third training principle of transfer training, which we will talk about next week. So thanks as always for hanging out with me here on the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad. Hopefully that gives you something to try for the next week. If you guys have comments, questions, anything along those lines, definitely shoot them in, post them. We're always happy to help you figure out A, if this is actually the right exercise for you, and B, if you're doing it the right way. So we'll catch you next week on the next episode. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. We'll catch you then.